Hi, it's Rabbi Jeremy from Mahar, and I'm here for our fifth night of Hanukkah candle lighting for 2024, right? The Christmas of Hanukkah. And so we've talked a little bit about the backstory for Hanukkah, right? We've kind of hit on it as we talked about. Maybe that didn't really happen, the miracle of the oil, etc., etc. So let's actually talk about the story, the traditional story a little bit, and some of the real history behind it. Because for the rest of our nights of Hanukkah, a little bit about what we'll be doing is talking about some of the things that come out of that backstory. How does the dreidel work? Stuff like that. So let's take just now to talk that through, and then we'll do our candle lighting, and that will be our fifth night of Hanukkah video. So where does the story of the oil come from? So the story of the oil shows up in the Talmud. The Talmud it's sometimes called a code of Jewish law or a work of Jewish law, and I don't know that that's necessarily fair to what the Talmud really is, because what the Talmud really is this sort of almost free-range intellectual discussion by the rabbis about any number of things, and it's almost stream of consciousness at times. There are moments where they'll be talking about a bunch of legal points and it's very technical, and then somebody mentions the name of a particular rabbi, and then you're off on a whole page worth of stories about that rabbi. And then it comes back around to whatever its discussion was, except it picks up and goes in a different direction. So there's stories, there's theological speculation, there's straight up legal discussion, there's interpretation of biblical passages, right? It really is a wide-ranging kind of a thing that includes discussions of history and things like that. So the Talmud is not a law code. It's really more a book about how to think about Jewish stuff. And so when you think about the Talmud that way, it gets a little bit more open, and some of the things that are weird about it make a little bit more sense. But we're not too invested in the things that are weird about the Talmud. It's just useful to know what's going on. So the Talmud's from around the year 500 CE, so 400 or so years after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which really kind of ends Jewish independence for many, many, many centuries to come, right? So that's where we're situated generally with the Talmud. And the Talmud talks briefly about the history of Hanukkah, or how we get this holiday. And I'm holding the very brief passage in my hand from the Talmud. It's from Shabbat 21b, so Shabbat is the tractate of the Talmud that is most focused on rules for Shabbat, and then 21b is the page number, so page 21, the 21st, really 20th sheet in the book, and then it's on side B, the back side of that page. And so I've got the Hebrew and Aramaic here, but we won't really go too far into that. I'm using the Steinsaltz translation, so this is not straight out of what the Talmud would say. It's a little bit, the Talmud's language itself is a little bit more concise than this, and it fills in some details. And so it says that the Gemara asks, right, the Talmud asks, what is Hanukkah, and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? And it answers. The Gemara, the Talmud talks to itself, so it asks a question, and then it answers its own question, which is very Jewish. What is Hanukkah, and why are the lights kindled on Hanukkah? And the sages taught in Megillat Ta'anit, a particular scroll, on the 25th day of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. So you can't do eulogies at funerals, and you can't fast. The days of Hanukkah are supposed to be happy days. Why? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it for 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with recitation of Hallel, a particular set of prayers that shows up in specific places during traditional prayer services. So the next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with recitation of Hallel and special thanksgiving and prayer and blessings. So the special thanksgiving and prayer and blessings really shows up in the Amidah, this sort of silent prayer that's the central part of most traditional Jewish prayer services. There's a passage that gets added in specifically for Hanukkah in that. And those are sort of the big changes with this Hallel and this other thing. But note what the story is, right? The story is the one that we know. 25th day of Kislev, the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled the oil, and they only found 1 cruse of oil, and that was only good for 1 day, and yet it lasted for 8. And we kind of fill in and that let them have enough time to find more oil to light okay. So the candelabrum that this mentioned is, really, we're talking about the 7-branch menorah that would have been in the temple. Torah talks about this candelabrum, so this is not like a new thing. It's the 7-branch candelabra, but notice it's when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame the Greeks and emerged victorious over them. So there's an acknowledgement that there was this group that fought a war, and that the miracle that the rabbis are talking about is not actually the Hasmonean victory. It's the oil. Whereas you could tell this story and say the miraculous thing was that the small force of Jews overcame these Greeks, right? So there's 2 ways of kind of framing a miracle. If you wanted to have a miracle as part of your story, and why you'd want to have a miracle is so that we can have dreidel games later and fill that in, although we'll ruin the dreidel miracle thing in a couple of days. So hang on for that. But that's the traditional story. The fuller story, and I've talked about it a little bit already, is that the Greeks initiated a religious persecution that seems to have been in response to Jewish infighting and the inability of the puppet Jewish leaders that the Greeks had put in place to collect enough tax money and to keep the peace. And in the absence of the ability to do that, the Greeks stepped in and decided that they seem to have decided that the problem was Judaism. And so we're not going to let you do Judaism anymore. That was really kind of the start of the Maccabean revolt. And the reason for it seems to have been conflicts between Jews. So conflicts between Jews spreads, and you get this broader persecution, which turns into a revolt. So that's the more human version of the story. And the Hasmoneans, this is the family of Judah Maccabee, the Hasmoneans kind of come out of this and become Jewish monarchs for really a very brief period of time. We're really talking less than 100 years before ultimately the Hasmoneans engage in infighting among themselves. They call in their friends, the Romans. The Romans come in, led by Pompey, right, one of the members of the triumvirate, along with Julius Caesar. They call in Pompey. Pompey eventually gets tired of one of them and just kind of takes over and says who's going to run the place. And that person remains a puppet basically until their death around the year 37 BCE. So the Maccabean revolt is sort of the beginning of a period of Jewish independence, and also really signals the end of a period of Jewish independence too, as these Hasmonean rulers, who seem like they would be pietists, right, religious people who want to restore the temple and all of that, as the Hasmonean rulers become just as Greek as anybody else. This thing falls apart. That's sort of the broader story, and that's not the story the rabbis choose to tell. And the rabbis choose not to tell that story because the rabbis are not fans of stories where Jews engage in military conflicts, because They understand that the temple was destroyed finally in 70 CE because Jews engaged in military conflict. And they understand that there was another wave of persecution from after 132 to 135, again, because Jews engaged in an uprising. So they're not fans of the uprising stories. And you can see they kind of go, the Hasmoneans showed up at the temple and there was a miracle, right? They don't want to talk too much about how we got into the temple with the Hasmoneans. So they kind of de-emphasize that. So that's the kind of the broader story of Hanukkah, and it's the traditional story. We got the story about the oil, and we got the story that we would get from 1st and 2nd Maccabees and from Josephus and broader historical work of the time. So, having said that, keeping that in the back of our minds, we have our Hanukkah. We have it set up for the 5th night of Hanukkah, and you'll just have to take my word for it that I put in the candles this way. I did, I promise. And we're going to light them that way. You don't have to take that on faith. We're going to do that now. We only have the one bracha, the one blessing for today because we are on the 5th night of Hanukkah in this particular year. So we're on a Sunday night and there's no Shabbat and there's no Havdalah and there's no other thing interceding. It's just lighting the Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah. So let's go ahead and do that and recite our blessings. Or our blessing. Nivarech et haor ba'olam, nivarech et haor ba'adam, nivarech et haor shel Hanukkah. Let us bless the light in the world. Let us bless the light in humanity. Let us bless the light of Hanukkah. And that is our candle lighting for the 5th night of Hanukkah. I'll see you hopefully tomorrow for our 6th night. Chag Sameach.